Speaker, on a point of order to talk on Maintenance Act. And this Maintenance Act is one of the bills that is airtight. This bill, based on my research, has been presented to this House on numerous occasions. And these bills, we all know, without law and order, a lot of us in here and citizens will go astray. So these bills are putting a lot of spouses, both male and female, in check, in that they should uphold and live right in the accordance of the good book. I know the member, Honorable Alfred, said she will have walk off good if this act was already dealt with a few years ago. But I applaud this government for bringing these bills forward. Although my Honorable Senator wanted the next bill, but that's for next sitting. But this bill, or these bills, without these bills, I think the society and Dominica at large will go astray. Because we need the parties that have been affected to get their justice. And every time you delay, justice delayed is justice denied. So we need, but I'm not going to stay long on this bill because staying long on this bill is denying the justice for the affected people. So I just want this bill to pass in this honorable house so the people that have been affected, every one of us must have some family member or relative that has been affected by this bill. We laugh and think, but this is some serious bills. Serious bills. Because I don't believe my cousin going to be shacking up for 5 years and leave the young man and they say she could escape. We'll take her to court. So it put people in check. So my cousin across the room. But these bills is very, very pertinent. Very pertinent. We all will laugh about it, but it's very pertinent when it comes to the uphold and upbringing, especially of kids. The kids and them are not listening tonight. They are not. So we have to pass these and put these in place to ensure that they are protected by the utmost and the highest house of Dominica. So I will rest here and leave the rest for you all to debate and pass those bills. I thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I stand to make my brief contribution. I must confess, Honorable Laville did an excellent job, very eloquent and articulate in presenting the bill. But I thought I would just add a few words in support of the bill. Mr. Speaker, we must appreciate the fact that this bill actually, it really expresses and it gives us the idea of how this government and the human nature of this government. This government has been always looking out for the less fortunate, for the vulnerable, and the elderly. Parents, grandparents, they can form an integral part of these vulnerable and less fortunate people. And such a bill, which really addresses the care of parents, grandparents, as well as spouse, doesn't make a differentiation between male or female, I think is a very progressive bill. And that comes on the heel that the amount of stuff that this government has been doing, whether it's the SBK program for parents and grandparents, whether it's the pension benefits, which we brought down to 65 years, and all the different housing interventions, so we cater for the vulnerable. And here comes the legislation now, which really just envelopes the entire comprehensive approach that this government has had for vulnerable, less fortunate, and particularly elderly people. And these policies come within that, that framework of all these areas that we're mentioning. And we must also recognize the efforts of the Aegis Chambers. Out of the 5 bills we have here, this is the only one that is done solely and primarily drafted by the Aegis Chambers The others were done with the legal unit of the OECS Commission, but this one in particular has only been done with the AG chambers, and we must commend them. I think they have done an excellent job for that, for this bill here. But also, this bill also sends a message to the rest of society that government can do all what it can do, but society has a part to play. And it's about setting a proper example, and it's about showing gratitude for our parents and our grandparents, and just letting society know that they also have to play a part, regardless of the fact that government is doing all what it can do, but society has to play a part in also addressing such situations in the society. Um, it's very clear in clause 3 and clause 4, and the bill, it really doesn't attack the respondent or the dependent. It's a very fair bill. I think it's very flexible in the sense that it uses the terms like necessary, reasonable needs. So if a spouse were to have some needs that are really extravagant in their lifestyle, the bill will take care of that because all these things are being considered when the court makes a decision in those states. And it also refers to cannot practically meet the whole or part of those needs. So it's not a matter of you just claiming something for claiming sake. It will go through the system. The court will obviously consider all those different things and decide whether you have a case to receive or not to receive. Also, clause 4, it says there no liability if the person remarries or if the person cohabit with someone else. So all those are part of the bill that actually safeguard both the respondent and also safeguarding the dependent. So that it's really a forward-thinking bill, and it caters for both, and which is really good in that sense. In terms of maintaining of parents and grandparents, the bill also talks about the capability of doing so. And it has to be by certain reasons. There are certain criteria, whether it's the age, whether it's the mental or physical disabilities, etc. And it's not just a matter, well, you must do it like that. Everything has to be considered. And also, let alone that, even if it's not a matter of you cannot, as a child, the bill also makes allowances. Yes, you have to maintain for grandparents, but you only maintain for grandparents if at all the children of the grandparents are not there, whether it's because of death, whether it's because of physical or mental disability. So all those things are captured within this bill. And the bill is not really attacking anyone per se, it's just providing a just and a flat level plate that maintenance can be given, whether it's for parents, grandparents, or whether it's for the spouses as well. Now, some of the parents or grandparents may be under the care and custody of a local authority or government agency. The bill also provides that this local authority or the government agency can apply on behalf of these dependents. So all those are covered because obviously someone may be in a nursing home, someone else may have custody on care of the particular parent or grandparent, so they can actually apply on behalf of this parent or grandparent if they're staying in a local authority or in a government thing. And there are many considerations that the court has to give in this particular bill in the sense that they'll assess whether the ability for somebody to be gainfully employed, because you might very well have a situation where a parent is in a better situation than a child. So the court actually makes allowances to review all of those different things. And obviously, let alone that, if someone has to stay home to look after a child, the ability to gainfully employed. So there are so many things in this bill that is being taken care of and is being considered before judgment is come by the court. Also, clause 11 in this bill talks about the duration. So obviously, if someone were to win a lottery or if someone were to inheritance and they're in a position now to cater for themselves, then obviously the court can actually have a variation in the order, or they can actually suspend or even cancel the order. And obviously, likewise, if at all the disability or whatever condition that the person is faced with is a permanent one, then the court can also say that the maintenance is for a lifetime. So everything, Mr. Speaker, I'm just trying to explain to you how flexible the bill is, and it really applies, and it can be taken in all these different ways to make sure that we have the correct decision, and someone not just putting a maintenance clause on anybody without, proper reason, etc. And also the idea of someone trying to, or if you end up in 14 days in arrears and you haven't paid, obviously the court can summon you, you have to explain why you haven't done it, and you might have to pay immediately, and if you cannot pay immediately, then there's imprisonment. So there are so many different areas, even the part of someone wanting to leave state, and if you haven't put in place the certain measures that will for the maintenance, you have to actually explain to the court. And the court is not pleased with your explanation, you will not be allowed to leave the state. And if you're caught leaving the state, that is where you can be fined $5,000 or 6 months imprisonment. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm just saying all of this to tell you that even in the misapplying of the monies, there's also a fine for this. If the money is given for a particular maintenance, the local authority or the government agency or whoever is in charge cannot use it for something else. It has to be used for that particular reason for maintenance. So, Mr. Speaker, with these few words, I really think it's a very good bill in the sense that it captures everything related to spouse, not differentiating male or female, as well as it's really an excellent example that we're setting for the society to look after parents and to grandparents. And also it's just putting the legislation to just sort of the icing on the cake of what the government is doing for spouses and parents and grandparents, the more vulnerable people. So all in all, I really support this bill, and I think it's a great move in the right direction. Thank you.
Yes, Honorable Roy, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I must confess that I came prepared to present on this bill, but my colleague, the member for Mahu, did an excellent job in presenting earlier on. So he touched on every aspect of my presentation. But just to say, Mr. Speaker, under the existing legislation, which is the Maintenance Act, Chapter 3561, in addition to the obligations of parents to maintain his or her child, a duty is imposed on every married man and every married woman to provide reasonable maintenance for the spouse. That's Section 3 of this existing act. An obligation is also imposed on men and women to maintain their parents once they are unable to do so due to old age or disability. In addition, Mr. Speaker, if you are in a long-term cohabiting relationship, or what some are referred to as common law, or you have just ended one, you cannot come to the court and ask for maintenance because you are not providing under this existing law, which is the Maintenance Act, Chapter 3561. Mr. Speaker, now the new maintenance bill seeks to create a more equitable and workable solution. It can be dismissed, it cannot be dismissed that common law relationship or cohabiting relationship are not common in Dominica. We cannot be hypocrites. Many individuals choose not to get married because they fear commitment. I know a few of them, but even then, they share their daily lives, including the finances, similar to that of a married couple. So, Mr. Speaker, we are saying that these individuals should not be disadvantaged. Mr. Speaker, if you would permit me, I just want to reiterate one of my colleagues' explanation about spouse. I just want to say it again so the listeners can hear. In addition to the ordinary meaning of spouse, the person you are married to, that's what you know what spouse is. Spouse is broadly defined in this new bill to include a single woman who for a period of not less than 5 years has cohabited with a single man, I'm saying single, as if she were in-law his wife. And it is similarly referred to a single man, Mr. Speaker. So it's in that context
that the benefit for spouse will flow. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to make references to certain clauses and certain sections of the bill because, as I said previously, it was clearly articulated. But just to say, the bill, when enacted, will lead to increased financial stability for spouses and parents in need of maintenance. Mr. Speaker, we have long grappled with the complexities of familial and financial responsibilities in the context of marriage, cohabitation, and parental obligations. I think it is high time we establish a comprehensive and just legal framework to ensure that our citizens are treated fairly and equitably when it comes to these essential matters. Mr. Speaker, like children, our elders are the most vulnerable stage in their lives, a period when they are most in need of compassion and care. Unfortunately, during the senior years, they are almost susceptible to neglect, poor treatment from relatives, and fraudulent activities. We won't go in details. You all know what I'm speaking about. That, Mr. Speaker, saw the birth of the Yes We Care program. And we cannot stop thanking the Honorable Prime Minister for initiating such a novel program. And it's further extended to the NP program where you have persons caring for the elderly within the communities. The social and cultural climate of our nation has evolved significantly over the years. We have witnessed a shift in family structures, with many couples opting for cohabitation rather than traditional marriage, as I said earlier, and our elderly population requiring greater support and care for the children. We must adapt our laws to reflect this changing dynamics and ensure that no citizen is left behind or unfairly burdened in the face of these new realities. Mr. Speaker, the Maintenance Act of 2003 seeks to provide much needed clarity and structure to the maintenance process, ensuring that spouses, former spouses, and children with elderly, sick, infirm parents and grandparents understand the obligation and have a clear path to resolving disputes. By outlining the responsibilities, Mr. Speaker, of spouses, the procedures for obtaining maintenance orders and enforcement mechanisms is in place. This act will ensure that our legal system is accessible and straightforward for all Dominicans. The enforcement mechanism provided for the Maintenance Act, such as the designation of a collection officer, will help ensure that maintenance orders are followed and those that need receive to support what they deserve. And going through the act, Mr. Speaker, it's make reference to a maintenance officer in every district. So everywhere there's a district for courts or hearing, there'll be a maintenance officer stationed to ensure that the person who are affected will get what is due to them. By passing this bill, Mr. Speaker, we have an opportunity to make a meaningful and lasting difference in the lives of countless families across our nation. We can ensure that our legal system is responsive to the evolving needs of our society and that every citizen is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. Before I end, Mr. Speaker, there's a particular section of the Act, a new feature, which I really like. That is the maintenance agreement. So for the persons who are not married and they're cohabiting, or they like that common law thing, you can have your agreement with your partner on maintenance. The law provides for that. Once it is vetted by a lawyer, you all sign legally, you all can decide if things fall through, or the law finish, you all can make it again, or you agree on a way forward how all you go to maintain each other. I think that's a very progressive and proactive move for this act and applaud the crafted for that. So, Mr. Speaker, as I end, I just want to say that the bill is very timely, and we as a government, we are working towards building a more equitable and just society. So, without reservation, Mr. Speaker, I give 100% support to this bill. Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, firstly, permit me to thank this House for what I deem to be quite constructive debate on this most important issue. In the spirit of gratitude, let me also, just like the Honorable Prime Minister, thank many people, many key stakeholders who worked hard, diligently in helping to get us to this most important juncture. And I refer to people like Speaker Emerita, and I am also very pleased by the announcement, the pronouncement by the Honorable Prime Minister too, to recognize people like Martin Anthony and Gloria Augustus during our upcoming independence celebrations later this year. And also Eva McIntyre Roach of blessed memory, and many of our staff of our soon-to-be social services department who are here and who have contributed, like Mrs. Azil Lewis and Mrs. Stedman and so on. We are all in gratitude to their hard work, and the AG's office and the steadfast, solid leadership from Honorable Blackmore through his chairing of the Cabinet Committee. So we are all in gratitude to them. And finally, but most importantly, also to the Honorable Prime Minister for always keeping the focus, the spotlight on issues related to social justice for over 20 years, Mr. Speaker. We as a nation, as a country, have benefited tremendously for that, Mr. Speaker. By way of objects and reasons, this bill speaks to provide for the maintenance of spouses and parents and for connected and incidental matters. This is really a reflection coming to be in a bold action to right long-standing social injustices, Mr. Speaker. There's no question that there are some parents in our society who have not fulfilled their obligations, but to a large measure, many parents, most parents in my view, have done over and beyond, Mr. Speaker, in fulfilling their obligations of compassion, love, time, and financing the futures of their children to provide the best chances and opportunities to them, Mr. Speaker. The basic honor that any committed parent can receive in their golden years is very likely dignity, and this bill ensures that the obligations of maintenance are met. Mr. Speaker, as it relates to, in this case, not parents and grandparents, but those within the blessed bounds of relationships, Mr. Speaker, many of us remember the good old days when the courtship probably first started, wherever that may be, back in the day by Warehouse, right now maybe by Petit Miami, and many other places, whether in school, church, the library, wherever. We remember that, and falling in love, and maybe the wedding, Mr. Speaker. And it was in school PM. And for many, consummation, other things. But Mr. Speaker, we often don't spend a lot of time in reflection on the work that is required to maintain the marriage, Mr. Speaker. And many times, we sometimes don't reflect either on how much that is put in, the undocumented parts and aspects, the work that is unpaid, what is not disqualified or even overtly forgotten, Mr. Speaker. And we often forget, Mr. Speaker, the social contract, and legal also, after we sign that document. And we forget sometimes, for better or for worse, in sickness and health, till death do us part, Mr. Speaker. And with marriage comes, and in the case of this bill, Mr. Speaker, the common law relationships, comes the expectation of security. And too many times we have seen families being destroyed in our society even before divorce or separation by way of punitive actions for what's defined as the spouse. And this bill therefore seeks, Mr. Speaker, to minimize any unfair economic effects of divorce to non-wage or lower wage earning spouses, Mr. Speaker. And it's important that we must right these wrongs. And this, Mr. Speaker, in large measure, is what this bill seeks to address. I think enough has been said, Mr. Speaker, on this very important topic and issue. And with that, I conclude. Thank you.
This concludes the debate. It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Maintenance Act 2023 be read a second time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The bill will now be read a second time. The bill will now stand committed to a committee of the whole House to be considered clause by clause. free past the committee stage with minor amendments. The question is that the report of the committee on the bill be adopted. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. So the question is that clauses, well, maybe I should ask the question first, that we'd like a decision from the whole House to either group the clauses and then we'll go to each section with the amendment one by one. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The question is that clauses 1 to 9 stand part of the bill. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
that the bill shortly entitled Maintenance Act 2023 be read a third time and passed.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Maintenance Act 2023 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The bill has been read a third time and passed accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, I move the second reading of the bill shortly entitled Domestic Violence Act 2023.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I stand before this honorable House to present the final bill, the Domestic Violence Bill, in keeping with our government's mandate for the adoption of new legislation that govern the protection and well-being of the vulnerable population. Mr. Speaker, the physical, sexual, psychological, and emotional abuse inflicted upon our people cut across class, income, age, cultural divides, infringing on and compromising their fundamental rights and freedoms. The inherent fear and insecurity resulting from domestic violence often constrains freedom. It limits participation in activities, access to resources, and in addition to this suffocation, the victims, and I speak to those who have survived, face social stigma, which compounds the harm already done. Mr. Speaker, the Domestic Violence Bill seeks to provide greater protection for victims of domestic violence and to make provision for granting of protection orders and for related matters. Domestic violence is a serious crime in our society. We have witnessed firsthand that domestic violence has devastating consequences for victims, their families and friends, and even the wider community. As a result, a wide cross-sector of stakeholders was engaged for consultation, both locally and regionally, with discussions commencing as far back as 2002. Today, Mr. Speaker, I am satisfied that these collective clauses represent the metamorphosis of social and legal protections for the domestic violence victims that are congruent with the new sensibilities of this progressive administration. Mr. Speaker, I am therefore proud, I stand here proud today to be part of a government which on this day will surely be remembered, Mr. Speaker, for the hope that it brings for the better equity, the better structure and actions, Mr. Speaker, by way of this bill, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I beg your indulgence as I go through the various clauses. Clause 2 defines the words and phrases to be used throughout the bill. The term domestic violence is defined as any controlling or abusive behavior, conduct, or act that harms, injures, or endangers the health, safety, life, limb, or well-being, whether mental or physical, of a person or any child, and includes physical abuse or threats of physical abuse, sexual abuse, or threats of sexual abuse, emotional, verbal, or psychological abuse, coercion, molestation, arbitrary deprivation of liberty, or forced confinement, economic abuse, intimidation, harassment, stalking, including cyber stalking, damage to applicants' residence without consent where the parties do not share the same residence. Clause 3 of the bill prohibits the conduct that constitutes domestic violence, and Clause 4, Mr. Speaker, gives the police officer, upon arrival at the scene of an incident of domestic violence, a duty to inform the victim and the perpetrator of his or her rights. Mr. Speaker, considering the urgent need to respond to domestic violence matters and the possible risk of physical and mental injuries, as well as the possibility of hospitalization, swift response from the police can in some cases prevent the escalation of domestic violence incidences and prevent further injury. Clause 5 of the bill provides for an arrest by a police officer without a warrant, subject to Clause 23. The bill provides that a police officer may, without a warrant, arrest any person at the scene of an incident of domestic violence whom he or she reasonably suspects of having committed an offense containing an act of domestic violence. Can you imagine, Mr. Speaker, what entailed previously, Mr. Speaker? Under Section 28 of the current Act, a magistrate has to first issue a warrant where he is satisfied by information or oath. Mr. Speaker, Section 29 of the existing Act, Act number 22, then states that for the avoidance of doubt, a police may act in accordance with the provisions of the Criminal Law and Procedure Act, where he has reasonable cause to believe that a person is engaging in or attempting to engage in conduct which amounts to physical violence. There still lies, Mr. Speaker, a few understandable and inherent challenges, Mr. Speaker, which this new bill seeks to address. The new bill spells clearly how an officer can respond to incidents of domestic violence and doesn't send the officer on an exercise to see what an already existing act may say, Mr. Speaker, and in this case, I refer to the Criminal Law and Procedures Act. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, based on the new definition, domestic violence is much more than merely physical violence, so a police officer can now respond to more instances of abuse based on the newly proposed broader definition proposed, Mr. Speaker. Clause 6 of the new bill provides for particular safeguards in relation to the definition of a child. This is necessary because our children who are exposed to the festering scourge of domestic violence are often left with profound physical and emotional scars discrepant to their trust of society. Clauses 7 to 21 in Part 2 of the bill provides for protection orders. By way of Clause 7, Mr. Speaker, an application for protection order may be brought on behalf of a victim by any person, including a police officer or an approved social worker who has a material interest in the well-being of the victim. Domestic violence is a social issue, not only a victim issue, Mr. Speaker. And this clause allows for protection of a victim even when he or she may still be vulnerable. Clause 8 provides for the court to issue an interim protection order which must be issued ex parte, pending the hearing and determination of the proceedings for a protection order if it appears necessary to do so in order to ensure the safety and protection of the applicant. By virtue of subclause 6 of clause 8, an interim order may be made for such period as the court considers necessary, but such period must not exceed 28 days. And by virtue of subclause 7 of clause 8, an interim protection order is automatically extended for a period of 15 days if the court is unable to hear and determine the proceedings before the expiry of the period in subsection 6. Mr. Speaker, all these measures are aimed at empowering victims of domestic abuse with access to care and much needed protection, as well as support services under the law. Clause 9 of the bill makes provisions for the terms of a protection order, and Clause 10 provides for the matters to be considered by the court in determining whether or not to impose one or more of the prohibitions specified in Clause 9. Clause 11 would require the respondent to provide an undertaking given on oath that the respondent shall not engage in conduct specified in the application for protection order or any other conduct that constitutes domestic violence. The provisions regarding seizure of firearms and dangerous weapons in domestic violence situations is contained in Clause 12. The court may make an order directing a police officer to seize any firearms or dangerous weapon in possession of the respondent if the affidavit made under Section 7.7 contains information to the effect that the respondent has threatened or expressed the intention to kill or injure a person in domestic relationship or possession of the firearm, ammunition, or dangerous weapon. It is not in the best interest of the respondent. Clause 13 makes provision for the service of notice of proceeding. Clause 14 for service other than personal service, and Clause 15 provides for the filing of affidavits. Clause 16 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, makes provision for the court to issue a final protection order, and this order will be for a period as the court considers necessary, but shall not exceed 3 years. By virtue of Clause 17, where the court proposes to make an interim protection order or final protection order, and the respondent is before the court has the duty to explain to the respondent the nature, terms, and consequences of the order. Mr. Speaker, by virtue of Clause 18, the respondent shall not be bound by a final protection order unless he or she has notice of the order. Clause 19 provides for variation and revocation of an interim protection order or a final protection order. Clause 20 makes provision for the service of a protection order, and Clause 21 makes provision for the enforcement of interim protection order and the final protection order, and provides a penalty for the breach of any such order. Mr. Speaker, Part 3 of the Domestic Violence Bill provides for police powers of entry and arrest and contains clauses 22 through 28. Clause 22 makes it mandatory for a police officer to respond to every complaint or report alleging domestic violence, whether or not the person making the complaint or report is the victim. The police officer also, pursuant to the provisions of this clause, has a duty to complete a domestic violence report, which forms part of the domestic violence register, to be maintained by the Bureau of Gender Affairs in the prescribed manner. Mr. Speaker, Clause 23 of the bill provides for the issue of a warrant of arrest, and Clause 24 makes provision for the powers of a police officer to arrest even without a warrant. Clause 25 places a duty of a police officer who has entered the premises pursuant to Clauses 5, 23, and 24.1 to assist the victim of domestic violence, whilst Clause 26 provides for a warrant of arrest and procedure upon arrest of a respondent where the court issues an interim protection order. Clause 27 provides for the powers of arrest where a final protection order is in force. If a final protection order is in force and the police officer believes on reasonable grounds that the respondent has committed or is committing a breach of the final protection order, the police officer may arrest and detain the respondent without a warrant. Clause 28 makes provisions for the existing criminal law to apply in relation to offenses committed under this bill. Mr. Speaker, Part 4, Clauses 29 through 42 provide for miscellaneous provisions. Clause 29 provides for the conduct of proceedings and details the people who may be present during the hearing of any proceedings, and does not limit any other power of the court to hear proceedings in camera or to exclude any person from the court. Under Clause 30, which speaks to evidence in a proceedings pursuant to the bill, other than criminal proceedings, the court may receive such evidence as it thinks fit, wherever it is otherwise admissible in a court of law. And Clause 31 provides for the standard of proof whereby a question of fact arising in the proceedings under this Act, other than in criminal proceedings, shall be decided on a balance of probabilities. Clause 32 provides for the restriction of publication of reports. However, Clause 33 provides for orders to be made with the consent of the parties to a proceeding. The provision for appeals is provided for in Clause 34. A person aggrieved by an order of the court or the refusal of the court to make an order may within 28 days after the decision of the court appeal to the Court of Appeal. Mr. Speaker, Clause 35 makes provision for the protection of mortgages. This section provides for the rights conferred on a person in respect of any property to be subjected to the rights of a person entitled to the benefit of any mortgage, security, charge, or encumbrance affecting the property under certain conditions. Clause 36 provides for rules of the court to be made by the Chief Justice, whilst 37 provides for property rights, which states that this act shall not be constructed as altering the rights of a spouse in respect to ownership of any real, personal, movable, or immovable property. Clause 38 places an obligation on a specified group of persons to provide notification of domestic violence of children, notwithstanding the provisions of any other law. However, a person referred to in the specified group of persons is not liable in respect of any notification given in good faith under this section. Mr. Speaker, Clause 39 makes provision for bail with several areas to be considered if the court is required to determine whether to grant bail in respect of an offense committed under this act. These include the need to protect the applicant from domestic violence, the welfare of a child or dependent, any hardship that may be caused to the respondent or other members of the family if bail is not granted, among others. Clause 40 makes provision for offenses and penalties, and 41 makes provision for regulations which the minister may make, while Clause 42 provides for repeal. Mr. Speaker, let us be reminded that domestic violence is a pervasive issue and is more widespread than what's reported within the public domain. Too many people remain silent while victims face ongoing physical, mental, and emotional abuse. Our communities and society have not been spared the impact of domestic violence. We not only have the physical scars of domestic violence, but also the mental and emotional scars of the victims and their families. Their well-being and long-term prospects for productivity and success are often compromised. The domestic violence bill presented considers that domestic violence is a violation of human rights and puts power in the hands of the vulnerable to change their circumstances and protect their families and their future. Mr. Speaker, it is my hope that this legislation will not only provide the necessary protections and recourse for the various victims, but it will also serve as a deterrent to would-be offenders. Mr. Speaker, with this much, I commend this bill to this honorable House for debate.
The bill is before the House for debate. Yes, Honorable Blanchard, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Permission to use this side of the table as my microphone isn't working, please, and permission to refer to my notes as well.
Permission granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to the debate on the Domestic Violence Act currently before the House. Mr. Speaker, at the onset, while I wish to give particular focus to the Domestic Violence Act, please allow me to note that in general, the 5 family bills introduced to Parliament today are a true reflection of this government's ongoing efforts and commitments to create an enabling, safe, and conducive environment for families to thrive. Mr. Speaker, who amongst us can doubt that? I dare to say no one can, because Labour is working. This Labour Party government has a track record, or rather, scratch, Mr. Speaker, I should say, this Labour Party government, we have an unbeaten track record of caring and protecting the vulnerable in every imaginable way. So, Mr. Speaker, it is no surprise that this Labour government is presenting these pieces of legislation before this Honourable House that are a sure way to strengthen our communities and empower our women, men, yes, our men, children, the elderly, and other vulnerable persons with access to protective services and security under the law. And one may ask, why is this no surprise? And the answer is simple, because this is what this great Dominica Labour Party stands for, and this is what we are about. In summary, Mr. Speaker, the legislation will provide our citizens with clearer options for recourse according to law when they are faced with challenges to their well-being and attempts to undermine and deny them of their rights. Yes, Labour government is ensuring that our people, all residents of Dominica who are wronged, can find remedies under the law. Mr. Speaker, I too am proud to be part of a government which considers the comfort and safety of all citizens at all times and is continually making and seeking ways to enhance the lives of the people that we serve. Mr. Speaker, I don't know about you, but somehow as I said this, you know what song came to mind? Labour's still the best choice. Mr. Speaker, I will now focus my brief comments on the domestic violence bill, which I must say is a most timely and a relevant piece of legislation. For sure, the completion of these family bills couldn't come at a better time when there is a clear societal need to curb acts of domestic violence in this our beautiful island. Domestic violence is an all too familiar societal ill which must be stamped out. It is an abhorrent crime perpetrated on victims and their families by those we expect to love and care for them. The bill before the House aims to protect and support victims, hold perpetrators accountable, and promote rehabilitation. Mr. Speaker, for instance, when a woman's life is snubbed out in the prime of her life, what happens to her children? What happens to the family unit? How do those affected continue on to become productive members of our society if they do not have the right support systems? There is no doubt that the cost of domestic violence for victims and the society at large is immeasurable, and the mental and physical effects can last a lifetime. It can be a burden on our social system, and in ways not always obvious, can impact the development of a nation. Yet, despite its far-reaching consequences on families and communities, domestic violence in some circles, sadly, are typical and unaccepted behavior. There are indications that it is more widespread than we care to admit, deeply ingrained and has serious impacts on our women's health and their well-being. In short, Mr. Speaker, it undermines the social, economic, psychological, spiritual, and emotional well-being of the victims. We believe that violence against women is a violation of basic human rights that can be eliminated through political will. And this measure sends the loudest message that this government has the political will to eliminate this from our society. Make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, this domestic violence bill, once enacted, will save lives. Mr. Speaker, the onus is on all of us, every single member of society, to acknowledge the magnitude of the problem and commit to making a change. We have an opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of those affected by domestic violence. By passing this bill, we are sending a clear message to our people that we are committed to addressing this pervasive issue. We owe it to the victims and their families who have most recently suffered the devastating effects of domestic violence, and to those who continue to suffer in silence. We have a moral and ethical duty to protect them, to make our society a safer place for them, free of the horrors of domestic violence. And being more specific, Mr. Speaker, I note that this bill today is being debated on the heels of two gruesome acts in December 2022, mere hours apart. Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that everyone at the sound of my voice can clearly recall the sad and horrifying news on December 30th, 2022 of a gruesome act of domestic violence. Our nation was left stunned when a young medical doctor in training, living in my community, Goodwill, was cut down in the prime of her life by her partner. In that same incident, her daughter was also attacked and left traumatized. Mere hours later, a similar incident was reported in the Roseau Valley when another strong, hard-working woman lost her life in a similar manner. In both cases, Mr. Speaker, I was struck by the inevitable trauma and pain that was inflicted upon the surviving children and the rest of their respective families. While I do not intend, Mr. Speaker, to dwell on those two events that I just referenced, I must pause to reflect on the loss of the two young lives. Mr. Speaker, they were someone's sister, a mother, a daughter, a cousin, a relative, a friend, gone too soon, may they both rest in eternal peace. Mr. Speaker, I strongly believe that the passing of this legislation will be a record of victory for their children, that another mother will not have to succumb in such a manner. Mr. Speaker, this bill can be considered retributive for an untold amount of domestic violence victims. Mr. Speaker, domestic violence is real, and this government is taking the bold step to address it. Mr. Speaker, I'm a realist. I know that the passing of this bill in itself will not permanently halt the practice of domestic violence, but I am confident that it will serve as a deterrent to perpetrators, and more importantly, I am confident that this legislation sends a loud and clear message to all and sundry that this Labour government, under the leadership of Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit, is very serious about the protection and well-being of our beloved citizens, men, I'm even calling their names first, men, women, and children, and will not tolerate any forms of abuse of this, our pride resource. Mr. Speaker, during a further review of the bill, I noted that Part 3 of the Domestic Violence Act addresses what is considered to be a gap in the ability of the police to adequately respond to reports of cases of domestic violence, whether or not the person making the report was a victim. The beauty of this section of the Act is that the police officer is empowered to act once a report is received, and there is no doubt in my mind that such interventions by a police officer can and will avert the escalation of some situations. Mr. Speaker, I have a few more written, but I think Honorable Laville, and in the interest of time, did an excellent job taking us clause by clause. So I'm going to jump to this. I am happy to note, Mr. Speaker, that with this legislation, the government of Dominica is proposing a more effective response to domestic violence. We are addressing the immediate, practical needs of persons, men and women, experiencing abuse, providing long-term follow-up and assistance, and focusing on changing attitudes and legal provisions to promote protections for all, so that every person can enjoy their full human rights and freedoms. As I wrap up, Mr. Speaker, through you, I wish to say to the good people of the Roseau North constituency that your Labour Party government, this Labour Party government, we got your back. We are working for you on a number of fronts, including through this legislation, the suite of family bills, which are all aimed at improving your living standards and securing a better life for you. Mr. Speaker, through you, I want to give a quick shout out to my dear constituents again, especially the single moms and the single dads, Mr. Speaker. I have a few single dads. I had a very interesting experience with one just a few days ago. And all he was single dad. And all he was interested in was the well-being of his children. Mr. Speaker, a number of them, they are all doing their best to care for their children with little or no support from the other partner. And to them I say, these family laws are exactly what some of you have been asking for. Be assured that the new structures within the government system and the welfare department and the police will go a long way to ensure the effective implementation of these laws. Certainly a positive development in the right direction. Mr. Speaker, with these few words, I again wish to express my full support to this domestic act being debated before the House. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker,
Yes, Honorable Prime Minister.
just 2 minutes. I stand to indicate my fullest support to this bill before us, the domestic violence bill. Just to say, Mr. Speaker, that the existing domestic violence act contains most of the provisions in this current bill. We're seeking to address the observations of the various publics on what we can do to better investigate, better report, and to ensure that actions that the court has demanded are implemented, and so that there's not a repeat and there is not a causing of the victims of domestic violence to live a life of continual fear, that the matter will be dealt with in its absolute state, and to ensure that there's proper recording of it. So if you look at section clause 24, this new provision there provides the police with added authority to be able to enter onto a premises without a warrant if he or she believes that there is someone who is in danger because of domestic violence misunderstanding. So this is a very, I think it's a modern piece of legislation. It is really updating our circumstance and to address our circumstance. But at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, as we've all agreed, legislation is put in place to sort of control our behavior or to give us a guide as to how we should conduct ourselves in a society. But it by itself will not put an end to this unwarranted situation in our country. It requires a societal response. Every one of us must play our part. And those of us who have been or who want to advocate against domestic violence must not do so only when an incident happens. We must engage ourselves in continuous advocacy, continuous education, so that the entire society, from school children all the way up to adults, understand our roles as individuals, understand what we need to look for as signs of domestic violence, and how do we go about reporting it, and to whom, so that we can prevent or put an end to any incidents of domestic violence. But this is certainly, this will put a number of different groups in society to sleep much better at night, knowing that the legislation has been updated, knowing that the legislation has attempted to fill the gaps that have been identified in the existing legislation, and knowing that those who are charged with the responsibility of protecting us in the society and providing support, psychological and social support, they have now a very strong piece of legislation. This is not targeting an individual or any groups of individuals. It is seeking to ensure that every one of us in society can live a peaceable life without any fear of our own safety and our well-being, and indeed our entire families. And so this piece of legislation is timely, and with the new structure that we put in place in the social services department, strengthening the social services, ensuring that we have more staff with the requisite skills and qualifications to complement the staff that already exists, the creation of the special unit, subunit within the criminal investigation department, whose sole responsibility is to investigate cases of domestic and child abuse cases. That will be their sole responsibility. They won't be involved in any other investigations, no vehicle accidents or any other activities, solely to investigate child abuse and domestic violence cases. Those police officers will be given the training. There'll be a symbiotic relationship between the social services department and the police and all the welfare officers, so that we have a clear understanding of the reporting and the working together, so that we can bring an end to this unfortunate circumstance in our society. So I want to again express my thanks to all who have played their part in ensuring that we're here today. But at the end of the day, if we're against domestic violence, we must be against it. Not choose when we should show our heads as advocates. And this is not something that any one of us in society should play politics with. This is too important a matter for us to scandalize it on social media, scandalize it on talk shows. This is not a time for us to cause victims to believe that they're perpetrators. No, this is not a time for us to cause perpetrators to believe that they're victims. No, we have to ensure that the victims of domestic violence are given the support that they need, and not to scandalize this thing, because this do not only affect those who are directly impacted on the domestic violence, but also impacts the children and families and indeed the entire community. Because if somebody dies in the village, everyone in that village is impacted from a psychological, emotional standpoint. And so let us hope that the spirit, the intent of this legislation permeates the society, and all of us recognize that this is not about pointing the finger, it's about us working together, joining hands, and creating a ring around our society, so that there is no presence of domestic violence. And if there is, then we need to intervene. We can no longer, as a society, know something is wrong, don't say anything is wrong, somebody gets killed, and then all of us cry. It doesn't make sense, when we could have prevented that situation from happening and have it reported. And again, with the special unit within the CID, ensuring that the all district police officers have basic knowledge of what they need to do and who they should report this matter to within the police service. All of these things we have to work on. So the legislation there is going to be critical, but we have to ensure that those necessary elements are in place. And this is why, Mr. Speaker, finally, we did not wait for the passage of the bill to approve the new structure for the Social Services Department. Because we wanted to ensure that once we pass this legislation, then we can roll in the new structure. And this structure, Mr. Speaker, I believe will cost the Treasury annually, on top, just for the new positions, about $400,000. That's just for the Social Services Department. And his monies, I believe, that will be well spent if it can work properly, work to achieve the intentions of it, the objectives of it. I believe it can play a crucial role in reducing the incidence of domestic violence in Dominica. But for us to get rid of domestic violence entirely, all of us must play our part. All of us must play our part, and to ensure that we give this support to this. I believe going forward, the other thing that we need to ensure that we put in place, and if it means that we have to rent facilities in the meantime while we construct built-for-purpose facilities, is safe homes. I know through the welfare department we provide rental support to families and so forth, but sometimes those homes are not comfortable enough and is not in an area that we would like it to be. It can be accessible, and sometimes those persons, even if we have moved them into a different village, people find them and they come to harass them. So we need to create a special facility, not to make them feel that they're in a prison or anything but to give them the comfort at night that they're in a safe place and they're properly provided for. So I think while we have been providing rental income support to those families and financial support to those families and so forth, I think we need to look at maybe identifying some proper and better facilities, and so we can rent out, have it there at the disposal of the welfare department, so that if there are instances, we're hoping that there will not be, but if there are instances and cases of domestic violence, then there's better accommodation for them. But I believe in the long term, or the medium to long term, the state should really look at building some facilities in different parts of the country at the disposal of the welfare department, social services department, in the event that those situations happen, that those victims and victims is not only to one gender, it is across genders and so forth. And so we're talking about the society, but it's going to require us to not create this euphoria when something happens, and then when it subsides, the impact subsides, then we behave as nothing is wrong in the society. There must be continuous education, and this is why I've been advocating, Mr. Speaker. I've been advocating very strongly with regards to education reform. We have to ensure that all of those elements, our children are exposed to them very early, understand the need to respect each other and to allow each other to speak freely, and how we go about resolving conflicts, how we go about resolving differences among ourselves, that there are ways other than physical and emotional abuse that we can get things resolved. And so we have to start it from now in order for us to stymie the incidence of domestic violence by capturing this young generation of children, so that they grow up in a manner of better understanding the need to work together and to resolve issues and problems among ourselves in a peaceful, respectful, non-physical, non-emotional, negative emotional way, Mr. Speaker. So I want to thank you and again commend the bill and to recognize the efforts and the leadership of Minister Laville and of course Minister Dr. Williams. Thank you.
Yes, Senator Reid.
One thing, I thought the Honorable Prime Minister, he told me to throw my speech away so he could take it and say it. Stole my speech. Okay, PM, I forgive you. There's one thing though I noted in the bill that I found was a bit ambiguous, that I have here in my presentation for Schedule 1, where we spoke about, one second, clause, oh, there it is, okay.
part 1, clause number 4, where we spoke about in section B, well, after 4, where we spoke about 1, a police officer at the scene of an incident of domestic violence, or when the incident of domestic violence is reported, shall A, inform the victim of his or her rights in the manner as stated in Schedule 1, and B, deliver to the victim a printed copy of the information related to the rights of the victim under paragraph A as soon as possible thereafter. I find that to be a bit ambiguous because in Schedule 1, we see here that everything is already laid out. So I stand to be corrected. Can the police officer just take this with him when he's going on the scene of the, because it says as soon as possible. As soon as possible for me could not be the same thing as soon as possible for you. So I think that we need to be specific here in terms of walking with the document to the scene, and immediately when you interact with the victim and I guess the perpetrator, that you will already hand them the information to victim and applicant regarding his or her rights. Because as soon as possible, I interpret it to be when the officer believes is as soon as possible and not really at the actual time. So that's one of the things I noted here in the bill that I found to be a bit inexact.
We are fully beginning process, so are you saying a point of order? Because when we reach committee stage, we can discuss. But yes, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought Honorable Charles, like.
Discuss it in committee stage.
Yes, yes, agreed.
Okay?
Thank you.
That's fine. Okay.
Mr. Speaker. Oh.
Yes, Senator Douglas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the bill before the House for debate is the Domestic Violence Act. And, Mr. Speaker, I was a bit surprised that you allowed my childhood friend from the 80s, the Member of Parliament for Rosewood North, Honorable Blanchard. I noticed that you allowed us some latitude in her presentation. She spent a good 4 or 5 minutes, Mr. Speaker, where she said, among other things, that this government has a track record in helping the vulnerable in every conceivable way. Mr. Speaker, trust me, Mr. Speaker, I have enough material to destroy and brick by brick what you just said. But I know, Mr. Speaker, that you won't allow me that latitude. But I certainly the evidence and the facts are there that if anything, what has happened in the last 23 years or so is that the social programs that have been developed by this government have in large part been developed as a result of the poverty this government has created. Okay, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to move on from here. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this bill before the House is a bill that I support, and all of us, I think, in this House support wholeheartedly. And I believe in many respects the present bill addresses many of the shortcomings of the previous act. Mr. Speaker, we have a problem in Dominica with domestic violence, a real problem. And Mr. Speaker, somebody has just stoops, but anyway, I'll pretend I did not hear that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have a major issue in Dominica of domestic violence, where we have our young men, for the most part, are not able to control their emotions. And reading through the provisions of this bill, I see really that there are measures in place and provisions that will deal with men who fail to control their emotions and their behavior. And of course, there are instances, very rare, where you have men who are abused, but in the most part, it's women who have been abused. And so I welcome fully this bill at this time. It's long overdue. I welcome it. Mr. Prime Minister, I was very heartened to hear, because there was no mention of it in the bill, that this government is contemplating the erection of shelters, or I think you call it safe homes. I believe that this is something that we need to fast track, because this bill is coming into effect, subject of course to the regulations being put in place almost soon thereafter. And we really need to have the safe houses. There are too many women in this country who they live in fear and they need somewhere to go. And even after we pass this bill and the regulations have been put in place, as we speak, they have nowhere to go. And so I'm hoping that in the budget coming up later in July, whenever it's delivered, that provisions will be made in the budget for the construction of shelters, at least one or two in the first instance. Mr. Speaker, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe at the moment that there is a hotline that victims of domestic violence can call, certainly on a 24-hour basis, if and when they find themselves in difficulty. And that is something I believe we need to ensure, that we have a 24-hour hotline to deal with victims of domestic violence. This is very serious. People have to feel that they can call at any time of the day or night, especially at night. And so I'm really hoping that it shouldn't take long, really, that we can set up a hotline so that persons who find themselves in difficulty are able to call this hotline and get in touch with people who can help. Of course, this bill, what comes with it, of course, is the extra costs involved in staffing the various government departments and divisions. And I note the Prime Minister, he gave a figure of $400,000 to start. I'm sure it'll increase as time goes on. But the cost implications, and it's indeed very, it's quite a lot. But I certainly applaud the government for taking the decision, even before this bill has been enacted, to allocate resources to strengthen the various government departments to make the provisions in this bill actually work. So, Mr. Speaker, I think generally there's no, as I said in the previous bill I spoke on, the bill is pretty much straightforward, like the previous bills, bold, forward-thinking. The key really for me now, and for all of us, is that the victims of domestic violence can feel, and persons who are vulnerable, that there's something in place to deal with their problems. I'm not saying there aren't any provisions right now, but I feel that this bill helps and contributes in making Dominica a safer place, and persons who are vulnerable, I think they can breathe a sigh of relief that here in this parliament, we're going to introduce a bill which will be passed into law, which will make Dominica a safer place. And it sends a clear message. This sends a very clear message to persons who seek to intimidate and harass and attack vulnerable women and children for the most part, that you have provisions, you have laws that will prevent those things from happening. And with these few words, Mr. Speaker, I support in full the Domestic Violence Act. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, very short, very short. We will ask the leader on to get rid of the notes, and I think the Honorable Prime Minister understood why he asked us to do that, because he recognized that there were not many more things that we would disagree on, and there are not many more things to disagree on. Not very often that I agree with you, but on this issue I do. Huh? Yeah, we understand that. Say that again? But no, I appreciate the presentation. I want to commend the Minister of Health for the work that has been done and all of the individuals who have come together in putting these pieces of legislation together. It's by no doubt a landmark piece of legislation. But there are only two things that I'd like to focus on, in not very long at all. But it's prevention, rehabilitation, and addressing our young people. I think hurting people hurt people, and the first people that they're going to hurt are the people closest to them. There are several reasons, and of course, like the Prime Minister mentioned, one piece of legislation cannot address everything and cannot address all the cross-cutting sectors and address all the issues. It's too much to ask one piece of legislation to do. You would never finish writing it. But you have to, we have to, maybe in an amendment or in future legislation, go deeper, and with the support of our community and our community organizations, go deeper in addressing root causes that are causing people to hurt and causing them to hurt other people. Sometimes we look at issues, and often we look at the surface of it. But I think the wherewithal, if we take it on and we go deeper and address some of the core root issues, it will help our community to go a longer way in terms of solving, curbing, maybe reducing violence, and particularly domestic violence. On the issue of our young people, I think, again, looking out for them, providing homes, and creating the education reform that the Prime Minister spoke about is critical. But one of the things that I think we can pay some emphasis in revitalizing is our vocational skills for our young people who are falling through the academic cracks. I think if we continue to allow young people to care for themselves better, and people who are able to care for themselves and fend for themselves and insulate themselves against economic violence, are able to get themselves more gainfully involved and occupied and less vulnerable to crime, particularly violent crime. Mr. Speaker, there's not much more to say. I think a lot of it has already been said. To say that we support the bill, look forward to its implementation, is an understatement, because we all do, because like Prime Minister mentioned, again, this is a pervasive issue that affects every one of us. So with these short few words, I'd like to pledge our support to this bill and look forward to its implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Sean Douglas may attempt to paint the truth with 1,000 bristles of convenience, but he will never get the true image that the Labour Party stands for, Mr. Speaker. And one day, not today, Mr. Speaker, because today is about domestic violence, I will rescue him from the illusions that he sees, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think the Honorable Prime Minister quite expertly handled the winding up So, and this is something, if you witness closely and you looked at body language and you looked at passion, Mr. Speaker, you would see that this passion in delivery from our leader, Mr. Speaker, is passion that's commensurate with purpose, something that he has been doing for quite a long time. But that passion never wins, Mr. Speaker. So I am absolutely honored to be led by someone with that passion and fulfillment of purpose. Mr. Speaker, permit me through you to speak to the hearts, the minds, the souls of victims of domestic violence, Mr. Speaker. I wish to say that through our eyes, Mr. Speaker, we see their pain, we identify with many of the challenges, Mr. Speaker. And by these bold actions, through this bill, through these legislations, Mr. Speaker, I wish to say that in a very serious way, we are making things better for them. We are addressing their pain. At this point, Mr. Speaker, seeing that so much has been said, and I wish to thank the House for the largely constructive discussion and debate, Mr. Speaker, I wish to plead passionately to the wider public, Mr. Speaker, on issues as it relates to domestic violence. No longer should the words come from our lips that I love her, that is why I beat her. Or he has to beat me to show that he loves me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we need to move on from these types of words and sensibilities, Mr. Speaker, and come into the new age. And while, Mr. Speaker, these bills have a lot of serious actions within them, Mr. Speaker, it provides tremendous recourse and it fills the gaps from the existing legislation, Mr. Speaker. The onus is on us in the society, Mr. Speaker, to protect our boys and girls, our women and children, our spouses and so on from the ills of this domestic violence ill that pervades and permeates through our communities, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, finally, I wish to say that in our local parlance, we often say, monkey know which tree to climb, Mr. Speaker. So with that being said, I hope Monkey can read, Mr. Speaker, and I implore, I indulge, Mr. Speaker, that Monkey reads this bill, and tomorrow Monkey can ask itself whether or not it wishes to climb that tree. Mr. Speaker, with these few words, Mr. Speaker, I conclude. Thank you.
This concludes the debate. It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Domestic Violence Act 2023 be read a second time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The bill now stands to a committee of the whole House. on the bill be adopted. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Domestic Violence Act 2023 be read a third time and passed.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill shortly entitled Domestic Violence Act 2023 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The bill has been read a third time and passed accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House be adjourned. Sign it down.
Mr. Speaker, I almost said madam.
It has been moved and seconded that the House be adjourned, sign the die. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. House is adjourned, sign the die.